Hi, my name is Paul Keller. As it was mentioned, I'm working here in Amsterdam also for a non-profit organization which is called Knowledge Land, which is, we call ourselves the think tank. We do all kinds of different projects, and one of them is Creative Commons here in the Netherlands. Creative Commons, and that's maybe the key question for me right now, is how many people here in the room know what Creative Commons is or use Creative Commons? Half, which makes it a bit difficult because that means, like, probably for the other ones I need to introduce Creative Commons to a certain extent, and that might be a bit boring for the people who know Creative Commons and are actually using it. But anyway, maybe a couple of, before I go into really introducing Creative Commons, a couple of remarks generally about how I came into talking about Creative Commons, why I got involved with copyright issues at all. And the first question for me, or maybe another question first, how many people do know the person on this t-shirt? You probably all do know, you just don't, do you know? No, it's Che Guevara, but it's just a childhood picture of Che Guevara. Che Guevara, if you want so, also like he's maybe one of the early bloggers. At least he also had a diary. He wrote the Motorcycle Diaries, which was one of the very influential things in his early years, where he traveled through South America and kind of like got sensitized for all the social issues going on in South America, and then turned him into a revolutionary. And while I don't really want to claim to be a revolutionary, or I don't think we are revolutionaries here, like there is a certain revolution which happened with the advent of the internet, which turned things on its head when it comes to copyright, obviously, because the internet basically enabled all of us, and I guess most of you are younger than me, but when I first got into touch with the internet and started publishing on the internet, the revealing fact was that you could suddenly publish stuff which was, at least visibly and in terms of reach and in terms of distribution, equal to that stuff which was published by big corporations, by governments. And there was a time early in the internet when usually even like most activists actually made better, slicker websites than corporations or governments, because they were like a little bit ahead in terms of technology. So you had suddenly this very level playing field where suddenly like everybody was able, or people were competing on different levels. It wasn't the activists anymore who had like the crappy, badly layouted, hand-copied, photocopied papers who could be distributed during a demonstration, but basically you had the same reach as corporations you were campaigning against, or you had the same reach as governments in terms of distributing information. And I guess that's a situation which then later kind of like got in a more institutional way got called like civil society media or blogging generally. Like it is like if you can write well and you know how to find an audience, there is at least no technical barriers anymore which really keep you from getting read, from getting your message across. It's so in that sense, on a technological level, the playing field has changed quite dramatically. And if you look back, what that means is basically people started publishing stuff, and publishing, when it comes to publishing, when it comes to distribution and copying things, then suddenly you have to deal with copyright. And in the situation where basically the only people who could publish were governments and large corporations or also smaller corporations, or people who were specialists in publishing, like writers, small publishing companies, newspapers. These people usually had access to lawyers or legal departments who could navigate them through the complexities of copyright law or intellectual property. Copyright law, intellectual property regulations were never really meant to be accessed for ordinary people. Like if you would just read something, if you would just consume something, if you would just buy books or watch television, you were never really you didn't have to deal with copyright law. And over the years basically from the start of the 20th century or the end of the 19th century onwards, copyright law had evolved in quite a complex system, which actually, in order to navigate that and in order to actually not not interfere with the rules of copyright. You usually, if you did something, you needed access to like specialized legal professionals who could navigate you through that. And as long, the only organizations which had to deal with that were basically big organizations who had access to specialized lawyers, this wasn't a problem. Now comes the internet, and suddenly everybody can copy, everybody can publish, everybody can reuse, transform stuff. It gets even more difficult now that the same which was maybe in the beginning of the internet was mainly true for text is also the same for video and sound recordings. And suddenly these regulations, which were drafted in a way and imagined for a world basically which was thought to only apply for professionals with access to legal help, suddenly apply to ordinary citizens. Like usually if you talk to people who produce something, one of the issues they always raise like is this general, there might be a problem with copyright, or we don't really understand the copyright thing. And this is where Creative Commons at some point stepped in and said we at least want to provide within the wider spectrum of copyright, we want to provide a set of instruments, licenses, which let smaller organizations, individuals, non-profits make use of copyright in a way which is suited for their needs and isn't like just lets them go with the flow and possibly brings them in all kinds of problems. And that's now where I think I'll start with the real presentation, unless there's any questions about what I just said before or any remarks. So, Creative Commons, to understand, this doesn't really work. Oh, it does. Okay, so to understand Creative Commons, because Creative Commons is basically something which builds on top of copyright law and which is in a way a reaction to copyright law, you have to have a little understanding of at least the basic functionality of copyright law. And copyright, the most core thing about copyright is basically it's something which arises automatically at the moment a work, not an idea, is created. So ideas, like something, the ideas are not copyright protected. You can't just go and say this is my idea. But the concrete, like writing down of an idea or drawing it, or at the moment where it becomes a work, a tangible something, it usually, and it passes a certain threshold of originality, then it becomes copyright protected, and you don't have to do anything. Like you draw something, you've got copyright in that drawing, period. There is a time, like till the 1970s in the US, when you actually had to put that little C in the circle under your work and put all rights reserved under it and send 2 copies of your work to the Library of Congress to have copyright protection, but that is something in international harmonization which has done away. And if you want it or don't want it, like everything you produce is copyright protected these days. The conditions are, and there's very few conditions. One is that there's sufficient originality, and generally that's almost applied in the sense there needs to be some originality. That's a very low threshold. And then the second interesting thing is copyright. You have copyright in something you write right now, or a work you create for quite a long period, namely at least 70 years after the death of the author, which is in many cases of people here in the room, if they live another 70 years maybe, some of us might not, that's something which is protected for the next 140 years as something, and protected means like you're the only one who can decide what happens with that, which in many cases, if you write something and you think about like how petty most of the stuff which is written today, or how probably irrelevant in the terms of history, most of the stuff which is written, that's a situation which is quite amazing. And then what is copyright? Copyright basically is the exclusive right of the author to interdict any uses of the copyrighted work. Basically it says all rights reserved by the author. I have the exclusive right to copy, to distribute that work. And I can give that right away, but I have to be asked, or I can attach conditions